The gladiator is already dead. The sand is still dark beneath him, and somewhere in the crowd, a person with epilepsy is moving toward the body. This is Rome, 1st century. The arena still smells of iron and dust, and the particular heat a crowd of 50,000 people generates when they have been standing in the sun since morning. The physician waiting at the edge of the sand is not a curiosity. He is not a fringe practitioner operating in shadow. He is following a course of treatment documented by men who consider themselves scientists of the body. And the treatment requires freshness. It requires that the blood still be warm. Pliny the Elder wrote it down. In his Natural History, a work of encyclopedic ambition completed around 77 AD, Pliny catalogued the remedies Romans used against the condition they called morbus comitialis. The assembly sickness, the disease that could halt a public meeting simply by appearing in the crowd, because a seizure during the comitia, the Roman citizen assembly, was taken as a sign from the gods, serious enough to suspend all proceedings. That name alone tells you what epilepsy meant in Roman life. It wasn't just a medical problem, it was a disruption of the civic and divine order. The body falling in public meant something had gone wrong between the human world and whatever governed it. And Pliny recorded, without apparent scandal, that some epileptics drank the blood of slain gladiators directly from the wound. The sword fighter was a cure. His blood was the medicine. Scribonius Largus, a physician who served the Emperor Claudius in the 1st century AD, compiled his own pharmaceutical text called the Compositiones. He was a practicing doctor, not a poet or a moralist, and his work was meant as a practical guide. The treatments he recorded were treatments people were actually using, which places this well outside the category of legend or rumor that attached itself to Rome in later centuries. Two separate literate men, working within the medical tradition of their time, writing about gladiator blood as though its use required explanation, but not apology. To understand why, you have to understand what a seizure looked like to someone with no framework for neurology. The body suddenly not the person's own, the limbs moving without command, the jaw locked or the mouth producing sounds the person had not chosen to make, the fall itself, without warning, without cause visible to anyone watching. It looked like possession. It looked like the moment something entered the body from outside and took temporary control. Romans called it the sacred disease, a phrase borrowed from Greek medicine, though Greek physicians like Hippocrates had specifically argued against a supernatural explanation. The Roman popular mind did not fully follow that argument. The falling sickness sat at the intersection of medical misfortune and divine interference, and treatments moved freely between pharmacy and ritual, because the boundary between them was not where we now place it. Blood, in Roman medicine, carried the life of the body that made it. The logic was not irrational by its own premises. If vitality resided in blood, then the blood of a man who had demonstrated extraordinary vitality in the most extreme circumstances available, a man who had trained for years, survived the arena, performed acts of controlled violence in front of tens of thousands, and only just been killed, that blood was not ordinary blood. It was the concentrated residue of a specific kind of human force. The gladiator had been alive in a way that most Romans would never be, and he had just stopped being alive. And in the seconds between those two states, something transferable might still be taken. This is why timing mattered, not days later, not blood collected in advance. The value was in the immediacy. The body still warm, the wound still open, the crowd still present, and the event still happening around you. People came down from the stands, physicians attended, families brought the sick. There is something almost clinical in how the ancient sources describe it, a transaction occurring within the spectacle rather than despite it, as though the arena had been designed partly for this secondary purpose, which of course it had not, but which tells you how thoroughly medicine, religion, and public performance had grown into a single structure in Roman life. And the blood was not always drunk from the wound. Pliny describes other forms, a liver consumed, contact with the living body before death, variations that suggest a practice with its own internal logic, a set of rules about proximity and potency that practitioners had developed over time. This is what medicine looks like before the mechanism is understood. You observe, you try, you note outcomes, you build a theory around the pattern. The theory is wrong, but the structure of the inquiry is not entirely alien to what came later. So picture the moment again. The sand, the crowd beginning to move, a child held by the arm, brought forward because the seizures have not stopped and nothing else has worked, the body still cooling. A physician who has read Pliny, who has consulted with colleagues, who believes in what he is about to do. He believes. That part matters. And what he believes and why is where this gets stranger. The word epilepsy comes from the Greek. Epilambanein, to seize, to take hold of, to attack from outside. The name itself is a diagnosis. Something external enters the body and grips it. That is not a metaphor the Greeks intended loosely. It was a literal description of what they believed was happening. And the entire architecture of treatment that Romans built around the condition rests on that foundation. If something foreign has invaded the body, then the cure is not to fix what is broken. The cure is to drive the invader out, or to flood the body with something stronger than what attacked it. Galen, the most influential physician in the Roman world, working in the 2nd century AD and writing more words on medicine than almost any figure in the ancient record, did not specifically endorse gladiator blood as a treatment. His theoretical framework actually pushed against the cruder forms of sympathetic medicine. Galen was a systematizer. He wanted mechanism. He wanted to know why a substance acted on the body, not just that it did. And yet the world Galen inhabited was one where the boundary between his careful humoral theory and the older logic of transferred vitality was permeable in practice because his patients lived inside both systems at once. The physician wrote the theory, the patient drank the blood, and the patient did not necessarily see a contradiction. Caelius Aurelianus, a physician of the 5th century drawing on much earlier Greek sources, recorded the full sweep of epilepsy treatments that had accumulated across centuries of Mediterranean medicine. The list is worth sitting with for a moment. Liver of a gladiator, human skull, dried and powdered, blood from the ear of a man recently executed, the brain of a bear, the fat of a hyena, the marrow of a stag. These were not the practices of the desperate poor improvising in desperation. These were documented entries in a medical literature that stretching from Greece through Rome and into late antiquity, treatments that name physicians recorded for other physicians, and what runs through almost all of them is the same logic the arena cure rests on. The disease is violent. The cure must match or exceed that violence. The substance must come from a body in which some extreme quality was concentrated at the moment of transfer. The gladiator blood sits at the top of this hierarchy for a specific reason. Other animals carried strength or speed. The gladiator carried something rarer. He carried the proof, witnessed by tens of thousands, that a human body could be pushed past every ordinary limit and still function. The training alone, which Roman sources describe in considerable detail, was years of physical conditioning that would have produced a man whose body bore no resemblance to the civilian body watching from the stands. And then he had died in that condition. The concentration of force had nowhere left to go except into whatever touched it next. This is not superstition dressed up as medicine. This is a coherent theory of the body applied to available materials. The theory is wrong, but the reasoning inside it has a structure you can follow step by step. And here is where the pivot has to be made cleanly, because the modern reading of this practice almost always gets it wrong. The Romans who brought their sick children to the arena edge were not being cruel. They were not spectators so numbed by gladiatorial violence that they had stopped registering the grotesque. They were people reasoning from the most sophisticated medical framework available to them, a framework that had been built by named, literate, serious thinkers over several centuries, and they were doing what the framework told them to do. Pliny was not recording a rumor. He was recording medicine. Scribonius Largus was not a fringe figure. He was a court physician. The treatment was not on the edge of Roman medical thought. It was legible within it. What Romans thought they were curing was not quite what we call epilepsy. They were curing a condition in which the divine world had made itself visible through a human body. The sacred disease, the assembly sickness, a thing that stopped public proceedings because it was recognized as a communication from outside the human order. The blood of a man who had just died at the peak of his physical existence, in a ritual space before the city, with the gods of the arena having permitted or denied his survival. That blood was not simply protein and iron. It was substance from the boundary between the living and whatever governed life. You were not giving a sick person a stimulant. You were meeting the thing that had entered the body with something that had just crossed the same threshold from the other direction. The seizure looked like invasion. The cure was a counter-invasion, the most powerful thing available, still warm from the crossing. This is why the sources specify timing with such care. This is why the liver, the blood, the proximity to the still living body all appear as variations on the same theme rather than scattered guesses. The practitioners were working a theory. They were adjusting variables within a system they believed they understood. That the system was wrong does not separate them as far from us as we generally prefer to believe. Medicine has always been the project of forcing a coherent explanation onto events that refuse to be legible. Seizures are still not fully understood. The mechanisms that make one brain susceptible and another immune are still being mapped. The Romans built the best explanation they could from what they had, and then they went looking for the most powerful substance their world could produce. So picture the arena one final time, not as a place of spectacle, as a pharmacy. The crowd, the sand, the dying man, the physician at the edge. This is a medical event, and the person being carried toward it is not being brought to something barbaric. They are being brought to the best available treatment by people who love them and are afraid, following the guidance of educated men who have read widely and thought carefully and arrived at a wrong answer by a route that is entirely recognizable. The human need to find a cause for a body falling without warning, and then to find something strong enough to answer it. That need did not end with Rome. It just found different substances to work with.